So it's obvious that, if there is a value proposition, Indian industry would be willing to pay. But having said that, there are several issues which are structural in nature, which
Yeah.
needed to be addressed. And so we are on that journey. It's a very exciting journey. And as you all know, India has focused a lot on innovation and R&D in the last few years. We have moved up from 70 on the Global Innovation Index to 52 in the span of 5 years. And the Indian government is pulling all stops to ensure that we come into the first 25. So I think the journey has just begun, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about that. Again, we should touch on that topic of the investment index and how that should be read, because not everyone knows the criteria of such indices, and it would be good to also get some insight from you on that. So the objective, as I understood, the objective was to concentrate efforts on understanding the Indian market and engage with the industry and government and academia. So actually at all three pillars. And you've held these positions in the past as well. So is there something that explicitly comes to light that you would like to talk about, where a project that you've run and on the government, on the academia, or on the industry side that helped you guide Fraunhofer?
Yeah, so interestingly, when we started the Fraunhofer engagement in 2008, the first thing that I was asked to do was something like a sector report, like an entry strategy report, which any company would do. And I spent 6 months in talking to most of the stakeholders across the value chain, whether they were government, industry, research, academia. And many of the factors that came out in the study, which is of course internal, but I don't mind sharing some of the key findings, was that India is ready to embark on the innovation journey. And there is a very, very fantastic ecosystem of fundamental research in India, whether you take the IITs or the Indian Institute of Science or some of even the CSIR institutes, etc. But there is a huge gap in the applied research scenario, which means that if you were looking at a continuum of 1:10 on a technology readiness scale, the areas of 1 to 5 are very well covered in India, and they can compete with the best in the world. But where we really need to focus a little bit more is in the technology readiness of 5 to 9, which is getting ready for the market. And that is exactly where Fraunhofer is positioned, which means that we take the research from the labs and bring it to the market in the shortest period of time, thereby accelerating research so that industry can benefit from this in terms of time and economy and cost. This is where I felt that India really needs to focus a lot more, because the interplay of the actors between academia and research with the industry was extremely weak. It has changed a lot today, but I think there are still, like I said, some systemic adjustments that need to be made. And there is a trust deficit somewhere along the line, which is being addressed very well today. But I think it's also a matter of evolution, how these stakeholders come together and add value to each other rather than either duplicating what one is doing or taking away from what the other person is doing. Added to the fact that today, with the startup scenario emerging so beautifully in India, I think startups and entrepreneurs have a huge role to play in this ecosystem. And that's exactly where we are working with the Indian government right now in creating an innovation ecosystem for India and forging the capabilities of various players in such a way that we add value and expand on each other's strengths.
So if I may ask a follow-up question on that. So when you say startups can play a role in this ecosystem, are you referring the ecosystem that will enable lab to market technology, or are you referring to the whole spectrum in general for 1 to 10?
Yeah, well, you see, I'm looking more at about 5 to 9 because that's my core competence, right? Fraunhofer really is not focusing too much on fundamental research. We have active partners with whom we collaborate. So in Germany, there are the universities, there is Max Planck, there are several other excellent institutions that do that. So we basically pick up where they leave and bring it to the industry. So I would see the same cohort emerging in India, The only difference being that there is still a matter of scale that needs to be addressed. There's a matter of efficacy of the innovation system that needs to be addressed, because there are some gaps that need to be taken care of and ensured that the movement happens faster. Because at the end of the
Right.
day, technology rate of change today is extremely fast. And
Yeah.
if you're going to have transmission losses in this value chain, it's going to hurt us very hard.
Hmm. Yeah. So transmission losses and technology readiness, that brings me to my next topic that I wanted to chat about, and that's technology as a war horse, right? So if we look back, let's say 50 or 100 years, automobile and automobile industry, German automotive industry has been the war horse of the second industrial revolution. What do you think is the war horse of the next industrial revolution? And also a follow up on that: are we already in it, in the revolution?
Yeah, well, digitalization is one of the biggest, uh, transitions that we're going through today, and this is, uh, in many ways, it's a very transformative journey. And the fact that it's happening around the world at the same time, unlike the industrial revolution or the IT revolution, I think this is something that has happened simultaneously around the world due to the fact that the world is flat today. We are closer to each other and we impinge on each other, whether you take the OEMs and the supply chain, etc.
Yeah.
So this has now become so much more real that unless we are all into this in some way or the other, we'll be losing out on the globalization game. So I think digitalization is going to make um, companies more effective. They're going to bring it closer together and have real time effects to be seen. But then
Hmm.
again, every country has to have its own strategy depending on its, you know, the context in which it works, to see how much of digitalization do we want to push through. There are countries
Yeah.
that need the digitalization because they don't have the human resource capital. India has it, and so many other Asian countries have it. So we have to see how are we going to plug and play into this entire mind game. And there, Industry 4.0 is one of the big topics that we are working with in India, smart manufacturing, to
Okay.
see what is the toolkit that Indian companies need to address digitalization in a very sensible and practical way, and not go overboard and try and do all kinds of green activities around it, but use existing infrastructure and upgrade it. At the same time, address difficult questions like your old machines not being ready, and so there are several challenges there which we are talking about. The
Yeah.
second thing that comes to my mind is, of course, artificial intelligence. Again, there we are working very, very closely with the Indian government and with some of the key stakeholders from industry and research to create a kind of a corridor between India and Germany in artificial intelligence, so that we share each other's complementary strengths.
Mhm.
We know that Germany has major domain expertise, India has software expertise, and if we were to kind of find a platform which takes each other's strengths and builds a third level, that I think we have a huge win-win situation. The same goes for solar energy. We know that Germany lost out on a lot of its investments into solar energy because of other countries overtaking, particularly China. But today, India has the capability. If you were to look at more than 1 gigawatt of production capacity in India for solar, we
Mhm.
have come out with a study from Fraunhofer saying that you can actually match the Chinese price and make it a viable proposition in the world. So I think there are many such examples where Germany's strengths and India's strengths can be combined to create much, much more than what we would do alone.
That's that, so. That's a good point. So digitalization one, and then the technology that's driving it, being AI. So you talked about pillars of strength for both countries, right? So Germany has its deep foundations in domain expertise. India has this term called applicability and frugal engineering, how to adapt the technology that is state of art right now to our own or India's own problems.
Yeah.
So when we look at that, so most of Asian and Southeast Asian countries are actually far ahead of the West if we talk about digitalization. Do you also see a path back so that the East can teach something to the West about digitalization and how to embrace technology?
Well, I'm not sure about whether we need to teach the West, because some of the applications that I've seen in the West I've not even seen in India, even though we have amazing software competencies, right? So
Okay.
so for example, telematics in Germany is so advanced. You know when your bus is coming to the station, what is the multimodal options that you have. I mean, these options don't exist in India today, even though we have such major competencies in software. So I think it's actually an understanding of what capabilities does Germany bring to the table and what can India bring. And my idea, which I have proposed in this Indo-German corridor for artificial intelligence, is to actually pick up 2 or 3 ideas that can be incubated, that can be done as proof of concept, and then to scale it in the different geographies to see how do we take it forward. So probably that is the way forward, because each geography has its own context, it has its capabilities, it has its gaps, and what we need is a technology common denominator that we can then take it to scale in each of our countries and bring the best minds to work on those. And I'm sure if we can set a good structure around this, we can really benefit from this. But what it really at this point needs is the mind space, because sometimes I'm really amazed at the disconnect that some of the decision makers in Germany still have about India. When I give very often I'm called to give a briefing about India to visiting German delegates from Parliament or from, and many of them are amazed to see what India has done in certain fields, right? So I think the brand equity of India, the capability of India in today's context still needs to be broadcasted back home back in Germany, so that people understand where are the strengths, and how can we link with each other.
Okay, that's that definitely that definitely makes a lot of sense. So brand equity. If you talk about brand equity, Fraunhofer has its own very, very heavy brand equity in the area of research, and also then applying that research to industry. And I think if we look at the last recession, some would say we already are in one as well. But if we look at 2008, 2009, Fraunhofer actually led the way to bring Germany out of the recession. What can we learn from that work that Fraunhofer did? Could you shed a bit light on that work, and then what can we learn from it?
Yeah, way back in 2009, 2010, as you know, the entire world was undergoing recession, and Germany was one of the countries that did have this also. But Fraunhofer worked together with more than 60 stakeholders across, the various domains. There were industry partners, there were research partners, and the government supported us, and we created a project called Resource Efficient Manufacturing. And what we effectively did was to understand that Germany is a technology leader, and to know that the only way to come out of the recession was to ensure that the exports that Germany does to other countries is not affected because they become expensive now. So one of the things that they did was to make production cheaper at their level, so that they could still sell at the market at the same price or even lower, but not lose out on the profits. So I can show you one slide. If you can put that up, I'll show you how we managed this entire project. So it was an innovation alliance called Green Car Body Technologies, and there were more than 60 partners. It was initially for a period of 3 years, but it was so successful and helped Germany come out of the recession. So actually, Fraunhofer was on the cover of a business magazine saying that this is the real stimulus package that the German government has given to the industry. And our then president, Professor Billinger, was given the award, the corporate award of Manager of the Year, which is unheard of because you don't usually have a research organization getting a corporate award. But that's the close cooperation that Fraunhofer had with the industry. And over the last 7 to 8 years,
Hmm.
we have developed many more, successively, we have created new project ideas, and we basically looked at how can you make energy efficient production possible, whether it is in tools, whether it is in production, whether it is in Lackierung, which is,
Yeah.
which you have. So over the years, we have demonstrated capability, used these 60 partners to, understand their requirements and develop solutions and thereby come out of the recession really fast. And I think this is something that we can do again because when you're in recession, a single company trying to come out of that on its own is tough. But if you have peers working together, if you have multiple value propositions coming together, I think it works much, much faster as we have proven. And
Mm.
this is the same suggestion that I'm giving to my Indian partners back home here in India to say that let us look at a couple of technology interventions and let's bring one OEM and its supply chain together or two OEMs and their supply chain together and try and break out of this mold. It is more difficult in India because this kind of a collaboration of multiple stakeholders is a little bit more difficult to achieve. But I'm sure that if we put our minds together, it would be possible.
Yeah. So, and I can imagine the work that you're doing with the AI corridor is a step in that direction, right? So to bring multimodal um, parties together, just from and not just from the industry, but also from academia, and
Mhm.
select one or two use cases, and then actually
Right.
show value addition and add to the brand equity that we talked about initially. So while we were having initial conversations for this event, Anandi, we also talked about the donor-receiver relationship that Germany and India have had in the past. And you had talked about very, very interesting thing that just has stuck in my head, which is how do we shift? We need to shift from donor-receiver to a partnership of equals. Would you- I'd like the audience also to hear that thought and what you have in the background for it.
Yeah, since I come from the development cooperation, I've worked there for about 10, 12 years, and I know that we've done a fantastic job in India. Uh, but I think times are changing, and in 1991, 92, India just opened its borders, and there was a lot of catching up to do. But the India today is very confident. There are a lot of excellent institutions, and as you know, it is really thriving and also striving to be the R&D hub of the world. We have more than 25 innovation centers in India, and most of the large MNCs have their dedicated R&D hubs in India, which is second only to the one that they have in their home country. So today
Like
we
Bosch,
shouldn't
Bosch
say
and Mercedes, right? So
Bosch,
this
Mercedes,
one, yeah,
Infineon, but even Dell, GE, one of the
right.
pioneers. So you name it, they all have understood that India has human resource arbitrage and we have value arbitrage. So for the same dollar, you get much more bang for your buck in India than you would get elsewhere. So this is a very outstanding combination of brilliant minds and the cost competence that we bring to the table. And I feel that rather than having a donor recipient status where
Mm.
there is a technology flow into India, I think we should really now move up the value chain to bring value to our relationships worldwide. And India can be the hub where technologies can be tested, can be, because we have the scale. I remember about 5 years back when I was in Bremen at one of our institutes, we were looking at a casting technology where you put a sensor into a casting mold and it has an RFID chip and it gives you the exact data on how this mold will behave under different conditions, whether it's cryogenic temperatures or extremely cold or hardening of the metal. Now, this is very intelligent technology in a brick and mortar field like casting, Now, if we were to bring this to India, at that point, 5 years back, my colleagues told me that each of these sensors would cost you €2.
Oh,
And when I came back to India and I looked at the kind of the casting industry and I analyzed what is the kind of requirement that we have in the casting industry, and I did some back of envelope calculations, it brought me down to 75 cents if we were to sell those sensors in India because of the number of vehicles that are coming out and the kind of demand that we have in India. So you can imagine what is the advantage that we bring to the world if we were to use these scale that we have and the market that we have to test some of the technologies which otherwise would be extremely expensive in a saturated market. And then you take those technologies back to these markets because everybody wants a cheaper product as long as quality remains the same. I'm sure even Europeans would not mind paying one-fifth the price if they were to get it. So I think we have a lot to offer, and it's high time that we are seen as a valuable partner in technology development and upgradation and deployment rather than being a recipient of technologies from other countries, because we should understand that if we stay a recipient of technology, we will always receive the third-rate technology which is out of the market, because nobody is going to give you the best technology. We shouldn't even expect that. So are we now in a position where we can say that, look, we have something to offer and let's together create a partnership? Yes, I think this is the time for it. And this is a very small window. There are changes happening in the Asian continent which make India a very, very attractive partner going forward. I think we all understand what these changes are. And if we don't use this window of opportunity and broadcast the image of India as a competent technology partner at eye level, I think we are losing out on a huge opportunity here.
okay. Yeah. So I completely understand the window of opportunity part. So if we stick to that example, and I'm also looking at the clocks, we are almost up against the time, but I really want to bring this topic up as well. So if we think about that sensor, right? So €2 to 75, so that's about 62% of cost reduction. Does that also means that the Indian industry, in this case, the casting industry, will have to step up the game and make an investment for the long shot, right?
Absolutely.
So they have to foresee a longer term gain, because this would demand the initial investment, which is probably often of a different proportion than they are used to. So could you comment on how can the Indian investor mindset develop or needs to change and look into this long-term aspect? I see that a lot in the R&D side as well.
Yeah. So that's a very important question. I talked about some systemic adjustments and that we need to make in India to kind of get the best out of this momentum that we have. I think one of them is the gap in technologies in the manufacturing sector. There are some very critical gaps that we have, due to which we are constantly importing technologies from abroad. And I think that really needs to be addressed in a very, very focused and strategic manner. The second is also the cultural mindset of Indian companies with regard to R&D. Typically, R&D is seen as an investment, as a cost, and they have to move to looking at R&D as an investment. Unless you see the fact that without R&D, you're not going to be having a unique proposition for yourself, to survive in the world, and it is becoming more and more competitive in nature. I think we are making a huge mistake here. You can always, most Indian companies want to in-license technology or look at a very, very short frame in which they want their ROI. I totally understand that ROI is critical, and Fraunhofer always, when we give a technology proposal, ROI is part of the package, just as training is. But I think the window that Indian companies look at is usually quarter to quarter or even a year. And you need to
Okay.
see at least 2 to 2.5 years. You need to have that horizon. And the third thing is that all things being equal, companies prefer to go to someone who does pro bono work. And in German, there's a saying that was umsonst ist umsonst, which means that something that's free is actually waste. So we should realize that there is, for quality, you will pay a price. And
Hmm.
if you don't do that, then you're really shortchanging yourself in the longer term. And if we are able to get the Indian companies to put this into practice. It's not like they don't know. I mean, when we talk to them, they all understand the language we are speaking in,
Yeah.
but it seems to be harder for them to actually put into practice. I think someone somewhere has to make this change. I see a lot of the second generation entrepreneurs
Hmm.
quickly coming onto this and being hungry for technology and being willing to spend the money and the investment that's required for gaining pole position in your core area of core competence, but I can't say that for across the industry spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think it's also a good occasion or a time in the event to take probably one or two questions from the attendees. The Q&A has been buzzing. I had my eye on the Q&A while
Okay.
you were speaking. So I think there was an interesting question about the brand equity from Mr. Nimbalkar.
Mhm.
And the question is, how do you recommend that we can improve India's brand equity, and how can Fraunhofer support those steps?
Well, I think it's everybody's job. We are all
Right.
ambassadors of our country when we work abroad, when we partner with global organizations. And I think one of the things that I have always supported is to, and I would request the German Indian Business Forum to do this. I've spoken to uh, you people when I was there last year, to Siddharth, to Shailesh, that we should probably have a possibility to talk to decision makers in Germany, to industry associations, and prepare short information around, the capabilities that India has in various technologies. It may sound very simple, but I can tell you, when I did the first background report on artificial intelligence in India and the opportunity for Indo-German collaborations, and this document was spread through the Indian embassy and the German embassy to many partners and decision makers, many were surprised by the data that I'd put there. They were not even aware that farmers in India use mobile handsets to
Yeah.
get information on markets and produce. They said, "Do farmers in India, can they afford mobile telephones?"
Mhm.
And I had to give them the data on how many mobile subscribers India generates every month.
Mhm.
So there are small facts like this which are not known, and definitely not known in many of the decision makers. So I think it's a very it's not something that you can do overnight. You have to keep
Right.
chipping at it. But I think it is important to put these things in perspective and keep informing decision makers, industry partners, and various levels of stakeholders who are interested in India, so that they have a better picture of what we can bring to the table.
Right. Yeah. So that's a very, very good point. And so I've been a fraction of your time in Germany. In Germany, so I've spent only 10 years here, and I have experienced that as well. So that plateau and the gap that is there. So that plateau needs to be pulled up again in terms of the
Right.
knowledge gap that exists. There's
Right.
another interesting question that I want to pull up from Mr. Vasudevan, and the question is, how should Indian product engineering and digital transformation services industry capitalize on the Industry 4.0 and help the German Mittelstand? So so this is the way back, right? So how can
Yeah.
Germany help the German Mittelstand?
Yeah, about 3 years back, we had done a study for Industry 4.0 opportunities for an Indo-German collaboration.
Hmm.
That document is public. I'd be happy to share that. We
Okay.
are right now, we are the technology partners to the Indian government, particularly for these areas, and we are working with the Department of Heavy Industries. We are also working with NASSCOM, etc., to help Indian companies to actually spread awareness about Industry 4.0, because digitalization, Industry 4.0 is a very broad topic, and every company, every country, every sector has to decide for itself, like I said earlier, what is the toolkit that I want to work with? How far do I want to go down this line? And so we are working with many of the industry organizations to spread awareness about Industry 4.0. We are working with creating use cases, which we are sharing with them. And we are also looking at developing content for modules for Industry 4.0 for these associations and their members. Needless to say, we also have private engagements with industry in helping them ramp up their digitalization process. And so it's actually a multifaceted kind of approach. I mean, there is digitalization where you as a company can real time contact all your subsidiaries worldwide and know exactly what is happening where. Now that would be the most connected enterprise, but you can also have a less connected enterprise based on what is really relevant. The last thing you want is that you have 10,000 sensors, get a lot of data, and now you don't know what to do with this data. So I think it requires a very pragmatic approach to digitalization, to use what is relevant, and that's where we are working with various stakeholders in India and Germany.
Okay. Another question is, so do organizations like VDMA, so VDMA, are they one of such kind of stakeholders that you're talking about on the German side?
Yes, definitely. My good friend Rajesh Nath, he had registered. I don't know if he's here, but he's a pioneer. He's been around for a long time, and VDMA is a very trusted, valued partner in Germany for us. So yes, wherever we can, we do share. I'm a very big believer in bringing your strengths together, because I think more than competition today, co-option is the best way forward. Each of us have our strengths, and as long as we can, be sensible about it and work together, we can achieve much more than trying to do things in silos and singly.
On that note, let's take probably one more question from the audience. Yeah, this is a topic that we also talked about earlier. So the cultural change. So the question is cultural change amongst industries, is it showing a positive sign in India? So do you already see the seeds of the change that we were talking about earlier already planted? Are they germinating already? What do you see?
It is a slow movement. Like I said, I see the change happening more in the middle level companies, and because they are nimble, they are very quick to understand a technology opportunity, and they're very quick to move. They're not hampered by bureaucratic structures.
Right.
I also see this mindset in the younger generation, so I have worked with a number of second generation entrepreneurs with family businesses who are moving to the right end of the spectrum. So even if they were in a very brick and mortar technology, they are willing to invest and move several levels, and this kind of energy from the second generation and from medium level companies really gives me hope that India is on the right track. Because it does call for a lot of risk taking. It calls for, coming out of the box and for disruptive thinking, which is not easy. But we also have to understand that that's the only way you can play this game. There are no more, if they ever were, guarantees of a market position. And if we are not going to make that energy and bring it forward to change, I think companies are not going to survive this competition that's out there.
So this is really, really interesting, and I still have at least probably 1,000 questions in my head that I would really want to ask. But we should keep the time, so we are against the clock. With that, I'd like to just summarize our discussion that we've had right now. So we've talked about digitalization and AI as the war horses of this third, if you will, or X.0 revolution that's going on, and that technology exchange is growing in importance, and there is a small window for this importance growth. And it will if we miss the window, we being Germany and India together, then probably we shouldn't because we shouldn't. And also the donor recipient to partnership model. So moving steps should be taken by industry on the Indian side, and the mindset should change towards long-term investment, and there should be readiness to invest in R&D, not just from quarter to quarter, but on a longer spans of 2 to 3 years.
Right.
And finally, Indian investors and industry should also look at investing on the complete value chain and not just their part of the bucket. Would you like to add anything to this, Anandi?
I'm extremely delighted that a lot of young people today are going to Germany for further studies, and this group is growing. This community is growing. I think they are the best bridge that we could ever have, because they are coming with young minds. They're coming with fresh ideas, and it's great to know that more than 20,000 young people are today in Germany studying at various universities.
Yes.
And I think in all these years that I've been working with Germany, I came to Germany where I would hardly ever see an Indian, 20 years back. Today, it's a big change, and I welcome this, and I hope that these young people will be the flag bearers for the cooperation between India and Germany. I believe that we are two nations who can contribute a lot, and I have a huge soft corner for Germany. So I think I would be delighted to see more relationships emerge and more opportunities emerge out of this new development that's happening. And I wish that these young people carry forward what we started 20 years back.